editor and journalist for the Nightly, Latika Bourke, and editor-at-large for the Australian Financial Review, Michael Stutchbury. Welcome to Q&A. Hello, I'm Patricia Carvelis. I want to pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation in Sydney, on whose land we're broadcasting from tonight. Remember, you can live stream us around the country. iView, socials, Quandra is the hashtag. Please get involved. We're going to start tonight with a quick whip around the panel on a question I think I'd like to hear your view on, and that is, who should lead the Liberal Party after tomorrow? Latika.
Neither.
OK, tell us what you really think. Neither?
I don't think either are good options.
David?
Well, I hope they choose, you know, if they can find a woman capable of leading and keeping them on track, that'd be a bloody good step change for them.
OK, I'm sure that's helped Susan Lee's chances, having a Greens endorsement. Ed Husic?
Well, whoever, I was going to say not Peter Dutton.
Well, that's not going to happen, is it?
Someone that's actually, they can believe in what they believe in, but are prepared to work with others. So it's up to them to choose who they want, but a different mindset would help.
Hollie?
Susan Lee.
Why?
Tomorrow. I think she's the right person to bring the party together. I think her life experiences, combined with the fact that she has 3 finance degrees, proves she's got not only the experience but also the intellect to be able to actually drive policy and make sure that when we do get to the next election, we've actually got something to say.
Michael?
Well, it's up to the Liberal Party, but I would say that the main thing the Liberal Party has to do is regain their advantage on the economy. That's traditionally been the Liberal strength. They've lost it, and if they don't own the economy, then they're in trouble. I think Angus Taylor is the best credentialed to do that. On the other hand, they also need to show that they've got a broad church, and so Susan Lee would be the woman and the move to the centre. But overall, I think they've really got to regain the economic agenda and the advantage over the government on that.
OK. We've got our first question tonight from Kate Rowe. Hi, Kate.
Hi panel. As a keen follower of politics, I'm bewildered by the dismissal of Ed and Mark, who, from where I sit, seem to be competent and articulate ministers. I'm disappointed as a Labor supporter that the old-school factions should still dictate who gets a ministry, and the Prime Minister either unable or unwilling to intervene. Ed, can you enlighten us on what do you think this does to the reputation and credibility of the Labor Party?
And I'll just clarify, when you say Mark, you're talking about Mark Dreyfus, the outgoing Attorney-General, and of course Ed Husic's next to me, so we know who he is. Ed?
OK, so where do I start? I think, look, the reality is factions have been around since the start of the party. The best way they work is when you don't notice them, and the worst way they work was last week. The reality is that a sort of brutal obsession about, well, you should have this many and we should have this many, instead of being able to work together to ensure we've got the best team being put forward. I think when factional politics doesn't work or mechanics don't work, and I think they can help manage merit, I think they can moderate ambition, and they also provide an orderly path for renewal. Like, when that works well, that's good. When it works in the way that it did in the last week, all it does is repel people from the party and make them question, like, how on earth are you making your calls? And I just don't think, at the start of what was a great win, I just don't think we should have had this distraction.
And when you say people question, we've heard you, Kate, and you've questioned it, but have you received that feedback?
Yeah, I had a few calls today.
One or two?
One or two.
Just help me substantiate how many.
Well, we had a lot of calls in my electorate office today for sure, and a lot of people contacting us, and like, I've got to say, I've been heartened, not just in terms of support from within the party across factions, but across the political spectrum as well, political rivals as well, reaching out. And I work really hard across business and unions and community, and they've been very, very kind. But put in a perspective, OK, I loved being a minister. I loved the chance to be able to work and get things done for the country, particularly in a space where I reckon we can put Australian minds to work to change our nation. But let's put it in perspective. I lost the job. I love that job. Worse things happen to people in this country and in this world. and it's just, you just got to move on.
Well, I think Ed has lived by the factional sword and he's died by the factional sword, and that's politics, that's the nature of it. I think in his particular case, he's been an agitator within the government that hasn't been well received. And I think there's a lot of delusion about the final election result. Labor has really been sort of elected on a platform of we're going to borrow a whole lot of money, it's a cost of living crisis, we're going to borrow a lot of money and hand it to people, and people will feel a bit better than that. And they've got no real agenda, no growth agenda for how to get out of the 10 years of deficits that we're facing to get growth going in it. Ed was the agitator within the government to say we've got to get business investment going. You never hear anything out of the government really about getting business investment again, because that's actually how you get growth going.
The Treasurer does talk about productivity in these issues.
Suddenly now we're going to be talking about productivity, but about business investment you hear very, very little. In fact, they're in denial about that. The budget papers really give a bad indicator of that, and Ed has been the one saying, look, we're in this technological revolution, AI, robotics, machine learning. He wants investment going in the sort of manufacturing space, and that requires particularly some tax reform and some business tax allowance.
Latika.
I just want to pick up on what Kate said. If the Prime Minister wanted to intervene to save Ed Husic, he would have done so. He has seen fit not to do so. And there's another bunch of people who could have chosen to save Ed, his own New South Wales right colleagues. They decided not to take the bullet, and Ed Husic is on the record as saying he didn't want to force a factional ballot. So there are ways that Ed Husic, by virtue of his diversity, what he has brought to the Cabinet, could still be in Cabinet, but it's actually his colleagues around him that have also chosen not to select him and continue him in the job.
Well, I've got to get a reaction from you.
Well, I sort of pick up on what Michael said. I've benefited from the way that factions work, but I'm not. If I can make the point as well, teams have got to be able to work out. Yep, there's always people that want to step forward. There'll be always people that want to have a chance to be in these roles. Sometimes you've got to do what's good for the group, and I've done that myself in times past. Could have easily won ballots, and in 2019 we had the prospect of a former Premier sitting on the backbench. I didn't think that was a good move, particularly after a really hard loss in 2019, and I did what I did. I lived my values, right? So I'm not saying anything different, but again, like that's just the way it goes. I won't necessarily be in Cabinet, but I'll be a lot freer to take part in caucus and debates that I think are important and on the issues I care about. Did you make that point to the Prime Minister today in your meeting with him? No, I didn't. Like, it was civil, it was constructive meeting, and I said I still want to play a part, and I still will. A lot of fuel. Did he offer anything? Fuel left in the tank. No, he didn't offer, and I didn't ask. I see a new role for myself, but I do intend to work hard to get support to get back to the front bench, because I'd like to play a part, helping the country I love.
Kate, are you disappointed that the Prime Minister didn't intervene?
I am. I've been a Labor supporter for a long time, and I understand not everybody understands how the factions work, and that it's brutal. It's absolutely brutal. But at a time when we're in a world that's almost chaotic, and Ed and Mark Dreyfus, to me, were competent ministers. I'm not saying brilliant or anything, they were competent ministers.
I mean, I don't mind.
There are some...
What have I got to do to convince you?
Lift you up and tear you down.
Yeah. Kate said you're competent, and that's as far as she's going to go tonight.
I've heard you on radio, the stuff you've been doing around AI, like you're thinking about the future, and I can't understand why that's not been embraced when we're dealing with a world that's rapidly changing. And I'm just really sad that it just seems to, we'll just move on. Because I think a lot of people just won't move on.
If I could quickly say, I think, look, these things happen. I feel particularly strongly about what happened with Mark. Mark has been a big contributor. He should have been given dignity. There should have been some class extended to Mark, frankly. I feel really bad for the way that he's gone. I think a lot of other people feel that way. And I think if people had just actually taken the time to have a yarn with him and talk it through, maybe a different outcome. It was just gratuitous what happened with Mark, I thought. Yeah.
Well,
And I think Kate's point is right. Ed Husic is one of the best communicators in that cabinet. He's going, I think...
I'm competent.
Not brilliant.
She's given you more than competent.
Yeah.
I think the Prime Minister has made a dangerous enemy in this demotion.
Are you a dangerous enemy?
No, I don't see it that way. But yeah, I don't see it
But
that
unlike
way.
Mark Dreyfus, who we expect to maintain a dignified silence, and you've seen that, Ed Husic, I think, is going to be on programs like this for the next year and a half, and I think he will be a very powerful thorn in the Prime Minister's side.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I don't think... I mean, Ed will choose his own path, but I can tell you now, I was digital rights spokes for the party. We had plenty of crossover on AI, on digital rights issues, and Ed was the minister in the previous government who was actually doing stuff. A lot of other people were talking about it, but Ed was actually doing stuff. Ed, I can say this now because the decision's been made, and you won't take the heat from a Green senator saying it, but you were collaborative. You disagreed. We disagreed sometimes, but we worked together, getting, I think, a critical Senate inquiry up. You had the respect of the stakeholders. I just wish Merit had more of a say in these kinds of decisions in politics. That's what I'd like. I'd like Merit to do it.
I mean, I remember making comments about Ed when he took one for the team for Christina Keneally a few years ago, and I just feel it's unfortunate that when you do take one for the team, whatever side you play for, that is not recognised and rewarded, or at least acknowledged going into the future. So for that, I'm very sorry for you.
Next, we'll hear from Masih Haddad.
To what extent does the restriction of Islamic voices in federal parliament reflect Australia's stance on the conflict in Gaza?
Ed.
Well, I'm getting them all.
Well, there's others. But it's a really powerful question.
So I think I'm a believer in diversity, not because of its token value, but because I think it provides strength. I think strong decisions get made with strong views, different views being brought to the table to look at things from a different perspective and bring those experiences to the table. And I think that provides for stronger, not weaker government. Debate is not a bad thing. And also, I've made this point elsewhere, you can't celebrate diversity and then just expect it to say nothing, right, around a cabinet table. And I felt, like no doubt you did and others, and regardless of faith, what we were seeing on our screens on October 7 and after October 7, what Hamas did, how the Israeli government responded, the deaths that ensued, there's no way in the world I could just sit and not say something. And in particular, I think people were turning to us to see how we would respond. And again, it's not lines of the day, it's a statement of values of whether or not you think this is wrong and whether or not the nation should speak up and whether or not the nation should be part of an international coalition to say, we've got to do better. I'm a firm believer in that. There's no way I would have stayed silent on it. I have spoken up and I've been a strong voice on that. And I'm also confident in my great friend in terms of Anne Arley will bring that to the table as well. I might not be there. Anne will do a terrific job because I've worked with her for many years and I know what her values are.
Masih, this has obviously been an issue that's really been something you're passionate about. Tell us about your passion for this.
Yeah, because with my family migrating from an Islamic country and turning a bit more into the non-religious kind of belief, we're just thinking, like, in terms of our government, who can we look up to who, like, reflects our beliefs and our values in terms of policy?
David Shoebridge.
Yeah, well, Masih, I think when you see the attacks against my colleague, Marine Faruqi, you see how hard it's been for Fatima Payman, like really hard for Fatima Payman. And she says that clearly, much more clearly than I can articulate it. You can see how tough it can be down in Canberra. It can be really isolating and really tough. We try and provide as much support as we can. And I think many people who have seen that play out over the last year are looking at what's happened to Ed and thinking how tough it is. But one thing I heard Ed say then is you can't deal with this like lines for the day. When you see, as our party sees, as millions of Australians sees, you see starvation being used as a weapon of war against a civilian population, of course you expect your government to speak out against it and build that international coalition. Of course we expect that.
Latika, The government would say that it did strengthen its position on Gaza. Penny Wong played that role, but obviously for some people it wasn't enough.
I mean, this is a diabolical issue for the Labor Party because they're torn at both sides, on their left flank and their right flank. I don't think you could reasonably say, knowing Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese's politics, that they are that divergent from, say, Ed Husic's views, but they are a government. And I think this question is really interesting because it doesn't take an Islamic voice to form a position on this issue. Anyone who's not Islamic could have the same view as Ed Husic on this. And so the question then becomes, what's the debate around the cabinet table? How much has the Prime Minister or the Foreign Minister allowed these voices to have a say in the policy making? And if not, why not? Now, if their positions are perfectly defensible, which they might be, that's up to them to explain. But I do really caution at the premise of that question being that only Islamic voices could form one opinion on this or another or shape that debate at the cabinet table.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. But Marcy, you know, you're expressing obviously a view which I think a lot of young people hold more broadly, Latika. It's right. Is that a reflection of your community?
Representing like young people, we do feel a bit overlooked, not really heard. We understand that government is a bit tricky in terms of like holding up different interests, but it would be more like, it would be better to see more representation in terms of like standing a bit more firm on issues, like, because Islam is the second most practiced religion in the country. And if we don't see that many ministers representing our issues, that's just to me like the kind of issue. I see what you're saying about everyone can have that kind of, everyone can stand up and advocate for an issue. But it is those like personal experiences that I feel can really bring
well, it is very close to home for people who have family and, you know, connections. There's no doubt about it. Stutchbury?
Yeah, obviously, as Ed said, October 7 was a horrific terrorist attack on the State of Israel, and what you see every night happening in Palestine, in Gaza now is a horrific thing too, and it's hard for us to all get our heads around it. I think what also has happened, of course, and it's a pity that as part of the factional deal, one of an Islamic and Muslim a member of cabinet has been ousted from the cabinet. That's an unfortunate thing. You want to have a variety of voices in there.
Dreyfus is a Jewish
voice. So,
but we also have, of course, seen as part of all this a real sharp rise, a very distressing rise in anti-Semitism in Australia, which has probably been one of the defining things of the Australian side of what's going on in this horrible conflict. And I think Australians generally just don't want to have feuds, terrible feuds from ancient feuds from the other side of the world brought back into the streets of Australia. And I think probably the Greens probably got a bit burned on that, going a little bit far. David no doubt will disagree with this, but probably got burned a little bit on the being seen to be part of bringing those feuds.
Did you get burnt? I mean, there was backlash in some places.
Well, I think we connected with millions of Australians who wanted our government to be doing everything they could to stop a genocide.
But do you accept that some people thought you went too far?
Well, I expect that Michael says
that.
No,
I mean,
there
voters,
are some people in the community.
Michael, I don't think Michael votes for you.
Perhaps the people of Melbourne.
Of course, there'll be some people in the community who don't agree with your political stance. But this isn't about a political stance. This is about when you see a genocide happening in real time on your phone and on your TV, when you see thousands of children being killed, when you see starvation being used as a weapon of war, you have this, I think, basic human responsibility to do everything you can to stop it. And if you take a political hit from some people because you do that, well, you take the political hit because you have to speak up, and you have to expect your country to do everything they can to bring whichever government's doing that, bring them to the table and try and prevent a genocide happening. Now, if you take a political hit, you take a political hit. But what else can you do?
Hollie?
Well, I always find it extraordinary in these conversations that no one mentions the hostages that are still being held in Israel and the fact that there are diminishing numbers of what we believe are hostages that are still alive. It was not Israel that started this conflict. It started on October 7th when Hamas killed, raped and brutalised young children, women and men, and videotaped it and killed young people at a music festival, and the willingness, particularly of the Greens, but certainly even within the community, to not acknowledge the pain of the Jewish community, the direct assault that occurred on the Jewish community. But it's also been the Jewish members of Parliament that have had their offices vandalised. It's swastikas that have been put all over corflutes throughout this election campaign. As to Michael's point, the rise of anti-Semitism is outrageous and absolutely beyond acceptable behaviour. October 9th at the Opera House happened before the Israeli government had in any way responded to October 7th. So to say that those sort of activities took place based on the back of Israel's actions is just false.
I think I said very early on we needed to acknowledge humanity on both sides. And I felt the pain that Israelis were going through for all the reasons you said, Hollie, and what Palestinians went through in terms of what David expressed. And I think you don't have to be of the Jewish or Islamic faith to feel that was something deeply wrong. And I've certainly singled out Hamas in times past. I think we can feel strongly about these issues, but that strength should not divide who we are as a country, where a lot of people have come here to be able to start a new life in peace. And we needed to find a better way to engage on this issue, which at times we failed demonstrably through anti-Semitism, which I have spoken up about for 20 years and worked with my friends in the Jewish community on. And I was very grateful they recognised that today. But also Islamophobia. Both are acidic to the social cohesion of the nation. We can call them out. We can be better as a nation, and we can stand stronger together while still feeling strongly about the issue.
Thanks, Ed. Next, we've got a video question from Lucia Heath.
My question's for Hollie. Hollie, I felt like celebrating the last week knowing that our federal parliament has passed gender parity, but I acknowledge that you have not felt like celebrating, and neither have our alumni who ran for the Liberal Party. My question is, with the potential election of Susan Lee tomorrow as party leader, is that a silver lining in what has been some very dark days for the party? And what can the party tangibly do to lift women's representation from here? Be that working with Women for Election or with others.
Hollie Hughes.
So hopefully Susan is elected tomorrow, and I think for the Liberal Party, it's not because she's a woman. She's incredibly capable as a politician and a person with a great history. It's completely false and demeaning to her to say it's just because she's a woman. I don't think you have an election loss like we have and say, oh, but don't worry, we're going to dish you up another middle-aged white guy. Everything's cool here, don't worry. I think it will give the opportunity for the party to really reset and have a good look at itself. Lots of people like to talk about the Liberal Party and a problem with women. I know from a policy perspective, we've certainly lost a lot of women away from the party. The reality is we did have a huge number of female candidates running at this election. Some have been successful. Giselle Captarian today has won Bradfield, so she will be in the party room tomorrow. There are fantastic women in our party room. And in fact, the Senate leadership team is women. We have done a really good job traditionally having good women come through, particularly in the upper house. But it is those seats. There were seats we had good women running in who unfortunately, because of the poor campaign, because of the lack of economic narrative, people like Jenny Ware in Hughes lost her seat. So we have lost some very good women as we've failed to talk to, I think, women better in the community.
Latika, obviously the Liberal Party has an issue with women that's been established over 2 elections in a very obvious way. Is Susan Lee something to be celebrated as a breakthrough here?
I would love to see what Susan Lee says about how to drive more women into the party. And it doesn't begin and end with just women. It's the whole show. Where's your diversity? When I was on the campaign trail with the Prime Minister in Cabramatta, I remember having this distinct impression that this suburb looks nothing like the Liberal Party. And that's the problem you have to fix. How do you represent the modern face of Australia, which is younger, which is more multicultural, and for me, when I said earlier why, you know, the two options on the table are not great, because I haven't heard them talk about how they want to drive reform. It doesn't matter to me if Angus Taylor is the guy. If he comes out tomorrow and says, I'm going to do what David Cameron did, drive an A-list, insist that these sorts of people represent our Liberal Party, and then how do we provide Liberal Party solutions to the modern economy? That's really the challenge.
I agree with you. The Tories have a much better process.
Well, they look more like England, don't they?
Well, they actually try to get a group of people together that have been properly vetted as well, and then find them seats, as opposed to... I mean, I've always had this thing, you know, when people say community candidates are great, but federal parliament is not about the local roundabout all the time. Now, Ed might tell me I'm wrong here. I do sit in that upper house, but... You know, there's a lot of people who've moved around the world, who've lived in different places, who've had really interesting experiences, but yet particularly the major parties seem to be drawn to people, and I guess we're seeing it in the Teal movement, who can say, I grew up in this house, I went to school round the corner and I'm raising my children. Well, quite frankly, that doesn't sound that exciting. You know, what experiences have you got that you can bring to this debate? And if the criteria is that you've never left the same suburb, well, I think we've probably got to start looking.
But no one is saying that. And I think you've got two excellent examples in Tim Wilson and Giselle in Bradfield. Two people, I think, with huge moral authority to come in and help reshape what your party should look like.
But they will be part of that.
And they will. But I would actually say let's leapfrog to these sorts of guys now, because you are at an existential moment. Well, how many more times does your party...
Giselle got elected today.
No, I'm saying this would be a more Tim Wilson argument, I think, because how many more electoral defeats does the Liberal Party need to get the message? And I know, Hollie, you're not part of this problem, but it seems to me that the Liberal Party does not want to listen to what modern Australia is saying.
Well, I guess the party room has an option tomorrow to say we are listening or we're not, and I guess that's where...
Michael Stutchbury, that deeper issue, do you think that actually is what really needs to be tackled?
Well, it's been mentioned by the David Cameron situation in the UK, and you look at the Prime Minister there now and the previous Prime Minister, were both very multicultural, not all white males. No. And I think if they go for like a growth agenda as well, reflecting their own communities, and reflect in a lot of electorates where there are large migrant or first or second generation
come
communities.
For an economic growth story in themselves.
The migrant community of Australia is often very entrepreneurial. I think it's one of why we need more migrants, because they've got tend to be more aspiration and more get up and go, and they are the sort of people that can be brought into, if you open up, can be brought into centre-right, pro-enterprise party.
I just want to say two things, and one of it was, I was thinking when Mussy was raising his points, that the parliament should increasingly look like our community for the reason that people feel like they have a stake, that they have a say, and it builds a lot more support for the way in which we operate as a parliament. So I think that's important. And very quickly, I grew up in my area. Like I'm telling, no, hang on, let me just finish, Hollie. Just hang on, let me finish. I grew up in my part of Western Sydney. I'm the son of migrants who moved out there and made a life moving from one part of the world to the other with literally nothing. I'm very proud of what I've grown up in, and I'm proud of the fact I can represent people I've grown up with, an area I care about quite a lot.
But you ran for Greenway,
the dynamic
and now
is,
it's Chifley.
The dynamic is, well, Greenway is literally next door. They both cover the local government area of Blacktown. But it's not,
you know, there is...
There's
difference there.
Like, I've worked in Mount Druitt, I've worked in Huntingwood, I grew up in Blacktown, but the point is this: don't we want politicians to actually represent the areas that they have that deep connection?
Well,
and I'll just make this point.
You can't exclude people because they didn't live in an area.
I'm not saying
life.
It's not talking about exclusion. Just hang on a second. This is a dynamic. I know this is going to make your eyes roll. This is the difference between a House of Reps and a senator,
and
right?
I gave that as that I made it.
I want to bring in
qualification.
I want to bring in one of our audience members tonight, Nick Fabry. Hi, Nick. I know you're interested very much in all of this and who takes the reins of the Liberal Party and the direction the party takes. What do you think it should do?
Sure. Well, my comment really is about the Liberal Party's history, claiming that it's the broad church of Mill and Bourke, no relation to Latika.
Have you checked?
And how it now faces an existential crisis of identity and relevance, especially with regards to leadership. So, and someone in Birmingham recently called it the nasty party. So at the election, it struggled for cut-through on big national issues where Labor is vulnerable, on national security, energy, the economy and housing. The failure to address these issues and challenges has fuelled fragmentation and polarisation around the world, like in the US, the UK and Europe. So I'm concerned about the current set of leaders, so Angus Taylor and Susan Lee's ability to rebuild the party's intellectual and policy foundations to meet the challenges for the nation's future. And I think actually someone like Keith Wallahan should have been leader. And I think out of the current crop, I agree with Latika that Tim Wilson would be an excellent choice.
Yeah, because Keith didn't win his seat of Menzies, right? He was one of the many MPs that lost. Michael Stutchbury, do you think someone like Tim Wilson, that would be a real game changer, right?
Yeah, look, he's been sort of locked up for 3 years out of Parliament, and he's sort of come back, and he's sort of been like no fear now. He's had the pain of being kicked out. Yep. And he's come back, and he's not going to take any prisoners. So I'd expect him. Say, I'm pretty sure that if Angus Taylor got up, he'd probably have a very senior role in a Taylor government, probably treasurer. And I think
I love your optimism. Taylor government after
Taylor government
Taylor
opposition at the election.
If we're talking about the Liberal Party, and I think there are ways to like we've got the Australian debate, and I think it has been a little bit it's been a little bit delusional about where Australia sits and what it needs to do. And you look around the world and look at the Canadian situation, which is the example of where the Trump effect was most it changed the whole course of Canadian politics. And the centre-right government, a Trump-light government, was opposition was supposed to win government. Instead, the centre-left government, headed by Mark Carney, came back in. But a fascinating subplot in all of that amongst young voters in the Canadian election just in the last few weeks, young voters like 18 to the early 30s mostly went with the Conservatives, went with Pierre Poilievre. And that was because they'd been relentless, the opposition party there had been relentless on housing, which is the real intergenerational tragedy, as being said. And it was very much a supply side, open up the economy, let's get more housing supply going, and have been going bang, bang, really hard on that. And so it's quite a striking thing that young people voted for the Conservative Party in Canada.
Yeah,
and that has been happening in the United Kingdom. It's also happened, of course, with Donald Trump, and he proudly says TikTok was a big part of that. And it's also happening with the populists right across Europe. But I do want to pick up on Nick's point about polarisation to make this point. We are told constantly that the information space is so much harder, that it's harder for us as newsmakers and news writers to get our message through, that it's harder for politicians to get their message through. Look at Anthony Albanese. He succeeded. He appealed to former Greens voters, he appealed to Liberal voters, and he appealed to Labor voters, all in this very fragmented information space. So that, to me, actually gives me a bit of optimism that if you're selling something that's worth selling to people, and let's face it, your opposition falls over sooner than you expected, and you have a great Trump effect coming through your campaign, there is a way to reach voters. And Anthony Albanese did everything. He went on podcasts, he went on programs like this, but he did a lot of niche and new things. And I think that there is a lot of space still for politicians to talk to younger voters where they're at.
Well, the Greens obviously are doing still reasonably well with young voters. They're a strong cohort for you. Yeah, absolutely. And the young voters we're talking to want a parliament that's thinking about the future. They want a parliament that recognises climate change can't be talked away in a political debate in the Senate or the other place, but actually needs to be addressed by keeping coal and gas in the ground so that they have a safe future. They look at the housing crisis and they realise that just the existing set of measures with tax incentives for property investors, no big investments into public housing, that's not going to give them the home that their parents had. And they're looking for a parliament to actually address the future. And when they see Donald Trump, they don't see some kind of economic future there. They are frightened and scared about that because they see that literally mortgaging their future. So I believe that young Australians see through that kind of aggressive politics. They actually want a parliament that's looking to their future because they have seen the last parliament really not address their future. And I get that sense of disengagement with politics from young people. I mean, our job as a Green is to engage them with politics and show that
We can use
Why
the next
didn't it
3
work
years.
for you, though?
Well, you have a look at our vote in the 18 to 35s. It's really strong. I mean, I think a lot of young people, though, a lot of people across the political spectrum were literally frightened by what they saw with Donald Trump, and they saw it being echoed with Peter Dutton, and they went for a kind of stability, just not that. But I feel very confident. We have a set of policy platforms that appeals to building a future for young people, and they want this next 3 years. Hopefully, we can work across the aisle work with the Labor government to build that future. Ed. That's my hope.
Okay. Next, we've got a question from Glenn Gibson.
As David Littleproud and Matt Canavan challenge for the National Party leadership, one of them, Matt Canavan, believes in eliminating any net zero aspirations we have and also firing up coal mines as much as possible. My question is to the panel, are the climate wars finished or have they just begun? Thank you.
Loving that backdrop there, can I say? Luna Park represent. Now, I just want to say David Littleproud has actually won that ballot today, so that was reported just before he did, and he's secured that leadership. But I suppose the bigger question, though, Hollie, Hughes, are the climate wars over, or are they just getting started?
Well, I think that really is a question for the National Party, and they've obviously had divergent views come out before their party room. Certainly going into the election, we were maintaining net zero, and that policy stood in place. I will be leaving on June 30, and it is very much up for the new party room to decide what they are going to do.
Do you think they should revisit it?
I think we need to have a really good hard look at what the actual cost is. I mean, David wants to talk about building a future. Well, what are we going to build it with? You need steel and wood to build houses, but if we're going to shut down all our industry that produce those materials, we won't be building very many houses. And so, you know, David knows I say this in the Senate, it's the unicorn farmers.
Not the first time I've heard it.
No, but the unicorn farmers up there with their magic puddings and very little economic awareness of how the country really works. If you're going to shut down all our export industries, if you're going to shut down,
but is net zero by 2050 a unicorn version?
We're an energy-rich nation, and the reality is cheap power. You want to talk about boosting productivity? It's industrial relations reform and cheap power, and you'll find productivity.
I'm all on board with cheap power, and we know because pretty much everyone with credentials in the space tells you what cheap power is. It's actually renewables. It's wind and solar with battery backup and pumped hydro. And if any country on the planet, with our geography and all of our natural assets, can not only make it work, but make it sing and make that renewable energy future with, at different times, literally free power in this country, it's got to be Australia. And I reject this kind of lack of hope and idea. We have the capacity to do it.
I didn't know the
I'm actually excited about what we can do with a massive rollout of renewables. But I will say this. We can put as many renewables as we like across the country, and we absolutely should. But if we keep opening up coal and gas mines, it's like ripping the solar panels off the roof, and we need to do them together.
How do we keep those communities afloat? How do we keep the economies running? And, you know, I never thought I'd hear the Greens support human slavery, because we know it's the Uyghurs that are making solar panels in China, that all of the wind turbines made in China. And so, you know, as long as you don't have to see where those solar panels and wind turbines are made and where they go to landfill at the end of their life. As long as you can have
this is like Trumpian talking points. Anything you can put.
Honestly, is that the intellectual
anything you can put? Anything you can put to destroy renewable energy and give the fossil fuel industry another sad, tragic decade to do over the planet.
Are you denying Uyghur slavery is used?
I am denying that that's the overwhelming element of the supply chain. Of course, there are elements I would like you to join with the Greens to have a proper anti-slavery commissioner in this country with the powers to get slavery out of all our supply chains. And I don't know why you don't vote for it. I'd like you to support it.
The UK has actually just passed legislation to counter this because of the concerns of slavery and Chinese supply lines here.
Well, let's make it across the board.
That is actually a real question.
Can I just say, so on these issues, like solar panels, they came out of the mines of Australians, developed here, and then went offshore, as is often the case, someone else manufactured them. We have the next generation of solar panels developed by Australian minds. We want to do that manufacturing here. The Liberal Party say don't take the solar panels from China because it's made from slave labour, and don't support making them here either. They bagged us out on that. The Liberal Party actually chipped our plans for manufacturing to be done here. Well, OK, you probably haven't seen it, but I'm just telling you.
Right, well, the Liberal Party wants manufacturing in Australia.
For that.
Most manufacturers can't afford to stay in Australia.
But the bigger thing is, to answer the question, has the Liberal Party learnt anything? Clearly not. Because, can I just say, does anyone want to see this argument about energy continue on and on and on?
Well,
no.
Hang
on a second. Sorry, let me just say this. We've got to find a way to generate more energy. We've got to do it quickly. We cannot have this rolling debate because the Liberal Party can't control the National Party, who seem to be stuck in 1950.
Let me bring you in, Michael.
Yeah. I think the energy transition is happening. Australia's got a lot of opportunities in wind and solar, but it is more costly than we thought. It's a much harder thing to do to decarbonise a fossil fuel economy. We still make most of our exports come from fossil fuel industries. This is not an easy thing to do. There's probably going to have to be a reset on energy and climate change after the election. Such right-wingers as Tony Blair in the UK is saying that the world is not going to get to net zero by 2050. I don't think the big emitters, China, the US, India and Russia are going to get to net zero by 2050. So it's happening, but it's going to take longer. And I think what we really need to do is open up the debate and stop saying that we shouldn't do things, like that we shouldn't have carbon capture and storage, which Tony Blair says we should really look into, and stop saying that we shouldn't have nuclear. Now, it might not be Peter Dutton's plan of big government-run nuclear reactors, but to say that it shouldn't be potentially part of the mix, because this energy bills are not going to go down in the next 3 years. And so the government already, Labor, promised they would go down. They're not going to go down again.
Well, they've got to take go down at this election.
They've got to take the subsidies off. That means they're going to go up. And so we just need to recognise, I think, it's going to take longer, and you should open up the sort of technologies that are available to help support the renewable transition. And gas, contrary to the Greens, I think gas is a real critical part in enabling more renewables, and the best way to reduce global emissions is to sell Australian gas into Asia and to reduce coal-fired power in Asia. That's how you could most quickly get emissions down.
Just quickly, that is just, none of the science says that export gas in particular, is going to have that kind of impact on reducing emissions. It's just not the science.
It's economics.
You can say it,
it's economics,
but it's not the science. It doesn't reduce
reducing our 1% global emissions going to change the climate worldwide. You can't just have a fact-free discussion and say, well, make it out to be a fact. It's not a fact. Our export gas has a very, very significant greenhouse gas impact. It's not helping us in getting to net zero. It just doesn't.
But that's true. But at the moment in Victoria, we've got a Labor government in Victoria is subsidising one of the dirtiest coal-fired power stations in Australia. Brown coal. It's being subsidised through to 2035, and our coal that runs the aluminium smelter there says they don't think that it can work without gas to firm it up.
Latika, you and I have been journalists together for a long time, and I feel like we've heard these debates.
We certainly have, but the question asked was actually, is this the end or the beginning of the climate wars? And I want to go back to
that's right.
because I think this is actually a really critical question, and I think the answer is it's the start of a new one. And Stutch is right to point out the international context here, because you have us trying to reach net zeros and other economies trying to reach net zero, and I want to separate net zero from broader decarbonisation, which I think is a goal everyone's still tracking towards. For example, the Albanese government wants to host COP. Are we going to get President Trump and President Xi Jinping to COP? And if we don't, what's the point? That's really the context against which this new battle on climate, I think, is happening.
I'll give you the final word on this before our next question, but that is a very pertinent point. The two biggest economies and emitters aren't exactly enthusiastic.
So a lot of water under many bridges before we get to that point. The reality is people are still get we have to work to net zero. They still get we've got to find a new way to generate energy. The nuclear debate is gone. Like, you can bury that with yellow cake. That debate should be gone in this country.
I disagree. I think nuclear is still
Just remove the ban on it and see what the market does.
Exactly.
The market has basically said, no,
they haven't.
Well, fine if they
and
say
there
they
isn't a
haven't.
renewable project that is subsidised by the
I think the
taxpayer.
voting market decided.
The voting
did
market.
not decide on one.
I really like how every time I speak, it's straight on a...
Well, it's an exciting panel.
That's right.
We're getting you ready for caucus again.
But can I make the point about nuclear? If you're saying that the market should be open and to back it, why did you want to put only taxpayer dollars in to fund it?
Well, look.
I mean, the reality is that.
Well, let Hollie answer that.
No,
We're not a fan of that.
Sorry,
I
haven't actually finished my points.
Well, I mean, come on, Ed.
So the reality is we have to focus on it, and further distraction is about politics. It's not about economics. It's certainly not about the environment.
And I'd say, Patricia, that I don't think it is over. That you see with the Nationals today, they'll agitate on the right of the coalition. That'll be an agitation. Just as on the left of the Labor Party with the Greens, they'll agitate over AUKUS, which has its own nuclear component. So you'll see these big national defence and security and climate change things will become ongoing big debates.
We'll agitate on AUKUS with the overwhelming majority of Australia who think that nuclear submarine plan to spend $375 billion on nuclear submarines we won't get is a disaster.
There you go.
And I think millions of Australians agree with us.
And let me just check with Hollie. You think the idea of the taxpayer building nuclear power plants is a dumb idea?
Look, I'm not a nationalisation person. I'm more about seeing what the market wants to do.
Okay.
But renewables is one of the most heavily subsidised, which is why we see so many people running candidates who support renewable energy who have massive investments in renewable energy.
All right, we've got a question now from Tom Vrolick. Hi, Tom.
The US and China have tonight agreed to roll back the tariffs for 90 days. What should the Labor Party do to deal with Donald Trump regarding his tariffs?
OK, so there was an announcement today of a 90-day pause on the tariffs, and it's a 90-day pause by China and the US, so that's significant. We'll see how it goes. Ed Husic, that's obviously positive for our economy.
Well, that's what you just said. We'll see how it goes. That's the key thing.
Yeah, because it can change.
And that's been the case, and certainly, Tom, you probably noticed it as well. Announcements made that these are going to be imposed, then they're going to be paused, then they're going to be withdrawn, and then they're actually going ahead with it. There's a lot of instability there. I think there is general concern about what this is doing within the US to the economy, to the cost of living, what people are seeing with inflation, their jobs, the pressure on businesses that are now, particularly small businesses, that are going, well, there's no way in the world we can pay these things or pass them on quickly to our customers, and they're going against the wall. So there's instability there and on the global level. We've certainly spoken up in our interest, and I've certainly taken the view that we should be calling out, in particular, that we have tariffs put on us by someone who should be a friend and an economic partner in many respects, and doing things that is completely contrary to the way in which they work with other countries to improve the way we trade, because it's really good, not just in terms of us being able to see the goods and services that we want as consumers, but actually builds really great relationships with countries, and all that's fraying. So I think the more we stand up on this is important. And the only other thing I'd say is this is going to require us as a government to think differently about the traditional relationships we've had with people. Don't think in terms of, does this mean we question our relationship with the US? But within trading partners that we can now increasingly and should increasingly build deeper connections with, within the Commonwealth and in particular Canada, within our own regional neighbourhood, and really getting within ASEAN and that block of 600 million consumers that are there. We've got to be able to work that way, and the EU as well.
Michael?
Yeah, well, I wrote it down. The Chinese tariffs are part of this deal that came out of Geneva. The tariffs that the US applies on China come down for 90 days from 145%, means there's no trade really, to 30% on the Chinese side. The tariffs they imposed on Americans came down from 125 to 10. So I think it's good news that it's not spiralling out of control, and it starts to come back to...
And 90 days is a significant
90 days
period.
to sort of let the air out of the thing and work out. So I think Trump's moving to a system where he imposes like a 10% tariff just about on everyone, probably including Australia, friend and foe alike, just as because he wants to raise some money for his own budget purposes out of the tariffs. It'll be self-defeating probably because it hurts their economy, as we know, for all our reasons. And then it'll impose perhaps more on China because they want to force or change the Chinese economic model, so they'll have some more on China. That's not good for us because China's our biggest export market, so that's not good for us. And there'll be special arrangements for steel and aluminium and pharmaceuticals and this sort of thing. So I think it's still a big shock to the global trading system. It puts a lot of uncertainty into businesses trying to make decisions about where do they invest their capital globally, because you never know what's going to happen now, so you just can't make a decision. That's why the economy is likely to sort of really slow down, and that's not a good thing. It means that we, as Ed says, have to come up with new build on some of the trading not blocks, but arrangements that are merging throughout Asia, really build on that. And we need to be much more competitive. Our cost structure's too high. We need to be competitive on world markets to be able to nimbly move things to new markets where, depending on how trade barriers are put up.
Yeah.
Next,
I was just going to say, you've probably asked the only question you're ever going to get that Ed and I are going to sit here on Team Australia because, you know, really in trade.
We found a Team Australia, guys.
Team Australia. But,
well done, Tom.
really...
You're the unifier.
We should all be looking to how we can best present Australia on the international stage. So well done on your question.
Yeah, there is certainly solidarity on that one. Good night to you. You're an absolute legend.
Yeah, we're announcing Tom's campaign for Prime Minister.
Good luck. Don't let the factions near you. Our next question, I had to make that joke.
Cheap shot.
My next question comes from Amaze Enyu.
So my question is to Senator Shoebridge. The Greens have seen their support decrease during the previous term, particularly in electorates where members held seats. Given the reduced support from members who are directly associated with moves to block legislation in the Senate, is now the time for the Greens to truly uphold their promise to work constructively with the government, or will you continue to obstruct in the Senate and attack the government in the press?
Oh, well, thanks for the question, Amazon. I think it is a question that lots of, particularly young people, but people across the country are asking, how can you make the parliament work? We did find it frustrating in the last parliament when we're actively saying to the government, we would like to improve. There are ways we could improve the legislation. Sometimes those negotiations were incredibly difficult and lengthy, and quite often we saw the government in the last parliament quite often vote with the coalition on things like immigration and tearing down our environment laws. We found that very frustrating. But we do think this should be a chance for the parliament now. In the Senate, where I am, the Greens look like we'll have the sole balance of power. And there is now no excuse for us not having the kind of relationship with Labor where we can just sit down and talk through the issues and hopefully put forward some of that incredibly important legislation and policy that we're going to need. Because there's no one else in that discussion inside the Senate. There's no excuse not to really, for the two of us to come up with hopefully a bunch of answers. So I think the Australian public wants the parliament to do that. We're committed to saying to Labor, let's use what might be the most progressive parliament that we've had elected. And I'd also say to Labor, political capital doesn't sit in the bank and accrue interest. You've got to spend the political capital when you've got it. There's a record amount of political capital now. There's a pathway through in the Senate. Let's use it.
OK, so what does that look like, though? Does that mean you... Because to the question... will be less obstructionist? Do you see that? I mean, like everyone, we ask of everyone, and we have certainly of the Liberals, to learn from their election. Now, I know you've done well in the Senate, but there have been some losses. Is that something you... Well, I nearly said learning, apologies.
No.
But is that something that you see
Patricia,
as a lesson?
I think we all feel the loss of Adam and Stephen Rex. We do, and I feel it personally, and you really do. And obviously you reflect upon your election, win, lose or draw, you reflect upon the election. But the Senate does have a job as the House of Review. Like, it's our job to actually look hard at government legislation and try and push it in the direction that we think is going to deal with the climate crisis like it's a crisis. It's going to deal with the housing crisis like it's a crisis. It's going to deal with the equality crisis like it's a crisis. And we will use it as a House of Review. But I think all of us, I think millions of Australians want us to achieve as much change as we can. So I think if that answers your question, I mean, we will look forward to having as cooperative a parliament as we can.
And who's your leader going to be?
Oh, well, I don't think you're going to get that out of me tonight.
Why not?
Well, I mean, one thing I can tell you about our leader is it's going to be an amazing woman, because we have a party room full of incredibly talented, capable women, and one of those will be the leader with the support of our party room later this week.
But can I say, I think it is good to hear that with David, and I was going to make the observation too. There's a big difference. I mean, David and I did have to work together, I thought, constructively on particularly issues around tech, where you don't agree with everything, but you reach common ground. That wasn't always the case, though, and the most frustrating thing for us was around housing. Now, there's a difference between a David and a Max in terms of the way that was managed, and I know I'm conscious too in terms of his obviously going through the process of dealing with that defeat, but there's something to be learnt about. We're all going to be bringing things we strongly believe in, right? But we've got to find a way through. From my point of view, and certainly from my colleagues' point of view, we've got to build more homes quickly, particularly social and affordable housing. Being held up on that for as long as we were was exceptionally unhelpful. It's not the standard, I think, across the board with the Greens based on my own experiences, but I think less of that, more constructive, and it's why I said at the start when you asked me the question about the Liberal leader, I think it's the same thing for the Liberal Party too. I get you've got your principles, your ideals and what you stand for, but we're all elected from different corners of the country to get the job done, and we should find a way to do it on common ground.
And Labor's got a giant mandate. Like, let's acknowledge that.
They do.
The Prime Minister is heading...
35% primary vote.
But look, what matters is the seats,
that's...
Hollie. I agree with you that the primary vote does say things, but what matters is the seats.
Yep.
And this guy has made history.
Oh, no one's denying that.
He comes in to the Parliament with a lot more authority and an endorsement for his mandate. And if the Greens want to continue to side with the next Peter Dutton, should it be Angus Taylor? That's on you.
I'm not quite sure that ever really happens.
I think we can both agree that
I think we can both agree we were not sitting there in Kumbaya.
And that was a political, an effective political message from Labor.
This is awkward because there's a voting record that shows that you did.
Labor voted with the coalition so many times on things that really mattered to us when we saw the immigration laws being pushed in utterly.
You and Hollie are insisting you weren't besties.
No. Well, we absolutely weren't. I think we can firmly agree on that.
But
can I just say on Max?
Voted with Labor to put as many
Max is not here.
Max
is not here, but I do want to say for Max. An incredibly brave voice for renters who actually put housing on the national debate. You may not have liked, across the politics, may not have liked everything Max did. And he also got $3.5 billion in public housing.
Has the Prime Minister been a bit mean about Max?
No, well, I think everyone had their say quite vigorously. I think it wasn't all one-sided.
Okay.
And the other thing is we would have had a lot more work on housing if it wasn't for the fact that the Liberals and Greens worked together to block it. So let's just recognise
that. We've prosecuted that at an election. We're going to end on one thing now that we see as, you might see as something positive to end the show on, something that's not a fisticuffs in the Senate. I'll start with you, Michael Stutchbury.
Well, it's something which I think would be a good thing to be good. We've been through an election, and what really struck me in the election was the amount of times that either side accused the other of lying. It's something that didn't used to happen in the old days. Like if I accused David of lying here, it would be, well, sir, I'll see you in the morning at dawn with pistols.
We're a peace and non-violent party.
20 paces. And I think it's a sort of demeaning thing of Australian life. So I think if both sides agree, just to cut down the constant barrage of accusing everybody of lying.
Yeah, it was. It was. I hadn't heard it quite like at the last election. Hollie?
The leadership ballots tomorrow, and I'm finished with that, is probably the most positive thing. Look,
But you're driving to Canberra tonight just to ensure that you get your vote.
I am not risking Canberra fog in the morning. So, anyone else going down, need a lift, let me know. Look, I think hopefully Australians have become a little bit more engaged and aware, and particularly the younger generation. And I think it's really important that they start to understand that if an inheritance tax or capital gains tax on the family home comes through, that is going to impact how their futures are going to look, and the Labor deficit is going to cost them money in the future. So I'm glad to see the youth taking more of an interest.
Yes, they certainly are. Ed? Take it away, Ed. We haven't got long on the show.
Look, I got to say, it's fantastic to see the number of new faces in our team. It's not Like they're really excited, the energy there, and from different backgrounds. And what I said earlier, from making our parliament look a lot more like our community, is really great.
It is.
Yeah. Well, what I hope is going right, then all this discussion, a lot of the discussion tonight's been about women in Parliament and women's issues. I hope we get childcare right. I hope we actually make childcare free for women. I'd love to see that happen.
And for men.
Well, absolutely for men.
Family issue.
Well, we don't want to be responsible for the kids forever. Yes, Latika.
I think my positive reflection would be this election, the Prime Minister asked for history to be made and he asked for stability and a majority, and he was given that. Now there's a really exciting opportunity to see what a Prime Minister with that amount of strength can do.
Well, thank you to our panel, Latika Bourke, David Shoebridge, Ed Husic, Hollie Hughes and Michael Stutchbury. And yeah, you can clap. Thank you for sharing your stories and your questions. Next week, I'll be with you in my hometown of Melbourne. Head to the website to register to be in the audience. I look forward to going home. Good night.
Guy, what kind of thing happens in your spelling bee?
Well, Erin, I'm so glad you asked. It's things like this.
Bing bong!
Sky. What now? And this.
Taking you down.
I bet you feel like a real big man.